A very good evening, everyone. Today we are going to discuss about the topic paper chromatography. So, in our previous class already we have discussed about the chromatography. What do you mean by chromatography? Means chromatography, it is a separation technique. That means by using chromatography, what we are going to do means we are going to separate mixture of compounds. If you want to separate mixture of compounds into individual compounds, you have to go for chromatography technique. Then how many types of chromatographies will be there? Means like thin layer chromatography, paper chromatography, column chromatography. Apart from that, developed highly improvised developed techniques like high performance liquid chromatography, high performance thin layer chromatography, or gas chromatography. These are the few examples of chromatography technique. So today we are going to learn about paper chromatography. So this paper chromatography was first introduced by a German scientist by the name Christian Friedrich Schonbein. So he is the person who developed paper chromatography for the first time. So this paper chromatography, it is one of the simplest method. It is one of the simplest method, and you can use this technique for isolation, identification, as well as for quantitative determination of organic as well as inorganic compound. So you can isolate any compound if you want to identify any analyte or any sample, or else apart from that, if you want to go for quantitative determination of it may be organic or it may be inorganic compounds, you can go with paper chromatography. So mostly students, you may get confused between quantitative as well as qualitative. Them only few quite a little difference will be there between quantitative as well as quantitative analysis. So what do you mean by quantitative analysis? Means quantitative, you are going to find out what is the amount of analyte or what is the amount of sample it will be present. That means you are going to find out what is the amount of sample, or you are going to find out what is the quantity of sample by that type of analysis. So that analysis we will call it as quantitative analysis. Apart from, I told you one more term you have to know. The term we will call it as qualitative analysis. What do you mean by qualitative analysis? Means here you are only going to identify the analyte. Here you are going to identify, that means which analyte is present, that you are going to identify in qualitative analysis, and how much amount of analyte is present, what is the quantity, you are going to determine in quantitative analysis. So that is the difference between qualitative as well as quantitative analysis. Now let's come back to the paper chromatography. What is the use of paper chromatography? So this paper chromatography we are mainly using for the analysis of unknown substances. That means if you want to identify any unknown substances, that substances, it may be any amino acid, it may be any glycoside, alkaloids, you can identify, or it may be any drug substance also, you can identify by using paper chromatography. So how this paper chromatography it will be working means, here you can see in the diagrammatic representation, there will be one rectangular paper. There will be one rectangular paper, a specially designed paper will be there, that mainly we are using for paper chromatography. And this paper chromatography, so we are taking a specially designed filter paper, and on this filter paper there will be a flow of solvent we are doing. That means a solvent flow will be done. So that is the main criteria how a paper chromatography will be working. So here you can see, here they are saying specially designed filter paper. So mostly which filter paper we are using in paper chromatography means that specially designed filter paper, we will call it as Whatman filter paper. That is the name of the filter paper which we are mostly using whenever we are performing paper chromatography. So this Whatman filter paper, it will be available in so many grades. That grade 1 will be there, grade 2, grade 41, 22, 44. So selection of that grade, it mainly depends upon which type of sample you are going to separate it. That means what is the nature of sample. Depending upon that, you can select the filter paper whenever you are performing paper chromatography. Then next, how many types of paper chromatography will be there means, mainly two types of paper chromatography will be there. One we will call it as paper adsorption chromatography, and second we will call it as paper partition chromatography. Now what do you mean by paper adsorption chromatography? See, whenever we are discussing about chromatography, two things play very important role in chromatography techniques. One we will call it as stationary phase, and second we will call it as mobile phase. So this stationary phase and mobile phase both plays very important role. Why? Because separation of complete compounds, it will be taking place between two phases only. So that is why stationary phase and mobile phase, they play very important role. So mostly stationary phase, it will be a solid support, it will be in the form of solid, whereas mobile phase, it will be always in the form of liquid. So what is the difference between paper adsorption chromatography as well as paper partition chromatography? Paper adsorption chromatography, here you have to take one rectangular paper. See, it depends upon types of samples which we are going to separate it. It's not mandatory that always you have to take rectangular paper. There will be some techniques in which we are going to take circular shape paper also, that we will discuss later whenever we are going in further classes. So here you can see we have to take one filter paper. So this filter paper, we will call it as Whatman filter paper. Now on this Whatman filter paper, what you have to do means you have to coat it with adsorbent. You have to prepare adsorbent which will act like a stationary phase. So how you are going to prepare that adsorbent means you are going to take that adsorbent, what I said you. So filter paper, you have to coat it with the stationary phase. So how you are going to prepare the stationary phase means you are going to take a material, that material we will call it as adsorbent. So that material, in that you have to add proper proportion of water. So this mixture where we are mixing water with that of adsorbent, so that we will call it as slurry. The mixture where we are, the mixture of water and adsorbent in a proper ratio, we will call it as slurry. This slurry we are going to introduce on our filter paper, which will be acting like a stationary phase. Now this is our filter paper. So this filter paper, what we did, we have coated with our adsorbent, which is nothing, which coated with stationary phase, which is nothing but our adsorbent, which we are mixing with that of water. So this mixture of adsorbent and water, we will call it a slurry. So this mixture, what we have to do means we have to take this filter paper which was coated with stationary phase. Now this you have to introduce into one chamber. So how the chamber it will be looking means, the chamber it will be just like a beaker. So in this beaker, what you have to do means you have to take the mobile phase. So up to how much level you have to take the mobile phase means up to 1/4 level you have to take the mobile phase. So that type of technique we will call it as paper adsorption chromatography. So these paper adsorption chromatography, it will be working on the principle of adsorption. But when compared to this and this two types of chromatography, this paper adsorption chromatography, we are not widely using it. So this paper partition chromatography, it is most widely used technique in paper chromatography, which works on the principle of partition coefficient. So the principle on which paper partition chromatography it will be working, that it is working on the principle of partition coefficient. So how we are going to perform, what is the stationary phase, what is the mobile phase in paper partition chromatography means you have to take the, as usual, you have to take the filter paper. It will be nothing but it will be your Whatman filter paper. So this filter paper, mostly how will be a filter paper means this filter paper, it will be made up of cellulose fibers. So this filter paper is made up of cellulose fibers. So what is the stationary phase which is in paper partition chromatography means the moisture or water droplets which will be present, the moisture or water droplets which will be present in between the cellulose fibers of filter paper, that water droplets, they are acting like a stationary phase. And when you are introducing this filter paper on in the developing chamber, what you are doing, you are pouring your organic solvent in that 1/4 level organic solvent or buffer solution we are introducing. So this organic solvent, it will be acting like a mobile phase. So that type of chromatography technique we will call it as paper partition chromatography. So these are the two types of paper chromatography technique, out of which we are not using paper adsorption chromatography mostly, we are using paper partition chromatography in whenever we are performing paper chromatography. So here you can see what is the principle on which paper chromatography will be working. It is working on the principle of partition rather than adsorption. As I said you, cellulose 5 layers in filter paper contains moisture. As I said, the moisture which will be present in the cellulose fiber, that moisture it will be acting like a stationary phase, and the organic solvents or buffers, they will be acting like a mobile phase. So that is the principle of separation. So this is about principle as well as introduction about paper chromatography. So next you can see how we are going to perform paper chromatography. That means what you require, what are the practical requirements we need whenever we are performing paper chromatography means first of all selection of stationary phase as well as how you are going to select the filter paper. Second, how you are going to apply the sample. Third, which mobile phase we have to select it. Fourth one, which is a very important part of paper chromatography, that we will call it as development technique. So many different types of development techniques will be there that we will discuss in our further classes. Next you can see detecting or visualizing agent. That means whenever you are separating the sample, you have to detect or identify that sample. So we are using some agents. That agents we will call it as detecting or visualizing agents.